And okay, we're recording.
Okay, and as a reminder, these recordings get uploaded to YouTube and are public. So if that bothers you, your alternative is to drop off. We'll start with community updates. They're listed in the agenda, and this agenda notes doc is posted in the chat. So please open it, add your name to the attendees list if you don't mind. We had a poll trying to decide whether we wanted to keep the same time slot because it conflicts with a meeting of the architecture SIG. The results came in, and by vote, we've decided to keep this slot in spite of the conflict. I was out on vacation for a while, but a blog post went out. Thanks, Michael Gash, for helping me build that, and thanks to a lot of you attending who were reviewers. The link is in the agenda for anybody who might have missed it. And a thing that didn't make the agenda for community updates, this isn't an official SIG event, but the annual North America VMworld conference is coming up in about 2 weeks. So if anybody in this SIG is there, please look me up, and there's others in the VMware Kubernetes community who will be there. Maybe we can just get together for an informal face-to-face meeting to meet each other in person. So yeah, I think I'm easily discoverable through the Slack or social media. So just ping me if you're going. That's it for the community updates, unless you have anything, Fabio.
Did you want to like highlight the blog post that went out?
Oh, I did. It's in the agenda. The link is there. And the topic is, it's not technically vSphere specific, but it covers running Kubernetes at edge locations, remote branch offices, and on-prem. And it particularly covers doing it on smaller installations where you might only have a limited number of cluster nodes, but much of what is in there also addresses larger on-prem installations. So anybody interested in that topic of on-prem or edge Kubernetes might find that useful. And it does talk a bit about how to utilize a hypervisor to advantage in that scenario.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to highlight that this was actually something that came up during one of the discussion on one of the early meetings we had in the SIG. I think this came from, I forgot the name, of a person from Walmart, I think it was, asking
yeah, I think it was blanking on his name. Anyway, whatever.
I think there was a specific need for like running like in Kubernetes small clusters on-prem, and this came out of that initial request. So yeah. Awesome.
The other thing I guess I should have put in the agenda is we just got a notice that the SIG has a couple sessions accepted for KubeCon China in Shanghai. So we'll put together plans for what those are, but we just got notice from the CNCF that our proposal to conduct those was accepted.
Yeah, I think the agendas are coming out today.
I think a few other people may have received notice, but I think technically you're under embargo because the CNCF wants to announce that first. So we'll keep it out of this meeting, and maybe if there's anybody here who is speaking in a session, just we'll respect the embargo, and maybe give you a shot to announce that at the next meeting of this thing.
Yeah, I think the embargo lifts today anyway. As far as I can tell from the email, the embargo ends on August 16th, which is today. So I'm not sure if they published it already, but the point was to have the agenda for KubeCon China out before actually saying that your session was accepted. Mm-hmm. But I think we're good with that.
Cool. Okay, I think that's it, unless anybody else has something they want to add last minute on community updates. Otherwise, I'll turn it over to Fabio to give updates on projects.
Any questions? All right. So there's a couple of new things in the active project update section today. You might remember that we talked about the cluster API effort for a few meetings now. We finally settled on having the cluster API vSphere provider as a sub-project of VMware, of SIG VMware. The sub-project was created, we had a voting, we had a repo created, and we established the sub-project. We also had established a bi-weekly meeting to sync up on the effort. Right now, it is scheduled for Monday. Let me just look it up real quick. I don't want to give wrong information. It's on Monday
It's 1, right?
1 p.m. Pacific. Yes, correct. It's 1 p.m. Pacific, which means it's 10 p.m. Central European, for those of you in Europe like myself. It's an hour-long meeting. I think we'll figure it out if this time slot works for everybody. I think right now we're gonna keep it that way for some time. Eventually, we will figure out if the time has to change or not. But there was a very good, productive first meeting. Loke is leading this effort. He's been, the technical lead elected the technical lead for this sub project. There's a PR out actually. Unfortunately, getting this information out in the proper channels takes some time. There's a YouTube playlist with the recorded meeting of Monday. Unfortunately, the link is not up in the Kubernetes community repo yet because the PR is still under review, but it is there. So it will be there hopefully before the end of the week.
Fabio, I've got a thing to add about that.
Sure.
And we can bring it up later on the agenda if we want to. So I know testing was brought up in that meeting. I missed it, but I know testing was brought up. And, this is a public meeting, so I won't dive too deep into this, but we do have a private VMware only meeting about testing. And I'm wondering, because of how testing, a lot of the efforts on those two projects are being assigned to myself and Hui and others involved in some of the non-public testing efforts, should we consider having the two SIGs form a WG at least to just focus on testing for the two providers so that those conversations can be public?
Yeah, I think we actually had a discussion on kind of something similar to this, a few meetings before this.
Yeah, but I mean, I was talking specifically to these two providers, not more broad. I've tried that tactic and people weren't too.
I think from an organizational perspective, I think it will be like a too narrow of a scope for an entire working group just to work with two out of three effort, because these are really basically two providers for two out of three pieces of Kubernetes, right?
I don't know. When you know better than I do, but when I did try to take it more broad, people were like, no, everybody should be able to do their own thing, and we don't want necessarily the collaboration. But because these are two VMware specific efforts, I thought a working group to focus on, maybe make it broader. VMware testing, with Kubernetes, that's broader, not quite a SIG.
There's definitely, in my opinion, Liz, there's definitely a need for a working group that will tackle the issues that are very specific to testing stuff against specific piece of infrastructure, like
I concur.
Providers, like cluster APIs, like everything that has to do with code that has to be tested against a specific piece of infrastructure. I think we had this discussion before, but more broadly, I think this would be something that can potentially fit under maybe SIG testing, maybe even.
So
SIG
that's the group. That's the SIG that didn't. I don't want to get hung up on this. That's the SIG that pushed down the idea of having a broad working group for this.
Okay.
They said historically they want SIGs to be able to do their own thing, and they don't want to provide that structured guidance across multiple SIGs. I was specifically speaking to VMware, though, related Kubernetes efforts. I agree it would be great for there to be a broad effort. I've gone down that road. People weren't necessarily interested. And I feel like maybe the best, because we did take that tactic and we can show that we did our due diligence, maybe to create something and then say, look, well, we wanted to involve others. We still want to involve others, but here's something we've done. But that thing that we've done, I'd still rather be able to do that under the sun than behind closed doors if possible.
I think,
For no other reason, like I can't bring up anything in this call or other calls that we've discussed in those testing calls necessarily because they were private.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't be appropriate for me to, rather.
So from my perspective, this would be an effort that can be, hosted under several different SIGs, potentially. One of them, I think, would be actually a great avenue for this effort is really SIG Cloud Provider. Because SIG Cloud Provider is kind of something that has to oversee all the cloud providers, right? And I see that there's some, there's some cross-pollination happening between SIG Cloud Provider and SIG Cluster Lifecycle when it comes to Cluster API. And, the fact that we all have to deal with, different part of infrastructure, different layers of infrastructure. And SIG Cloud Provider has been, very, obviously a popular place to have the sort of cross-SIG, cross-infrastructure providers discussions. And I think this could be, potentially something we can put forward and sponsor you and us as SIG VMware in SIG Cloud Provider to see if they're willing to host a working group there.
Like I said, I'll tackle with you offline. That's a different discussion than I was trying to raise. I meant just specifically to these two VMware efforts. There were private conversations. I'd like to be able to refer to them on these calls. That's all.
Or we can just, spread out and have this conversation in, during the calls that we have for Cloud Provider and Cluster API vSphere. That is another option. Okay. We have a bunch of updates on Cloud Provider vSphere as well. So Cloud Provider vSphere is moving towards sort of alpha release. We really want to have something to be ready by the time the Kubernetes 1.12 ships, which is still September 25th, as of today at least, which is, 5 weeks away from now. So we're on a good track. We just merged new test unit tests for the Cloud Provider code. Thanks, David, for that. It was great work. We do have CI working, so it's shipping up, real good.
Hey, Fabio, I just wanted to give a quick update on that. You were out. I actually forked it and created a Travis config. We've talked about that in the past, but to get conformance tests going, I've got the build working. It's building it and pushing images to my repo, but we'll be able to drive conformance tests for at least the adder tree from that. That was SIG Testing's recommendation. We're still working to extend Cube Test. There's going to be a broader discussion. I don't know if it's going to be about testing, but we discovered yesterday that the CNCF wants all conformance tests that are validating conformance for a Kubernetes to go through Sonobui, which doesn't handle head testing, only Cube Test does. So we're going to have to figure out if we need separate types of test workflows to submit conformance results to CNCF versus the CI that will produce the results that pushes them to the test grid.
Gotcha. Yeah, thanks for doing that work. It's
no, that was all Hui mostly to discover that.
Well, thank you both for doing this work. Yeah, this has been some. I think there was little synchronization between the two efforts, like requiring conformance tests for cloud providers and actually having those conformance tests being run. But it's cool that we actually have something that is starting to shape up, and we're getting to a point where we can actually have that ready for 1.12. That's great.
I don't know if we should submit this or post it on the issue. Does anyone? I'll file an issue for this. Never mind.
Okay. There's actually a big discussion happening right now on another aspect of the cloud provider. This is actually something I wanted to discuss and throw out for consideration today. This is more of a, I would say, something that we're trying to understand what will be the best venue for to have this discussion. So during the work in actually bringing the cloud provider audit tree, right now, most of you know that in tree inside Kubernetes, we have both the cloud provider code, which is basically dealing with the node controller. So registering nodes, making sure that all the nodes are up and running. If their nodes are not up and running, then make sure that they're patched has not ready in Kubernetes and so on. So taking care of keeping track of them, what's the node status. There's also all the volume management stuff that is happening. So managing volumes, managing VMDKs, persistent volumes, and so on. All that code today in tree is part of the cloud provider code. So everything is basically as a single piece of code that is getting called by different drivers inside Kubernetes. As part of taking the cloud provider code out of tree, we wanted to have something that will reflect the same functionality that is currently in tree, also out of tree, which means that we want to have a CSI plugin, so container storage interface plugin for vSphere that will basically bring us the same functionality that today we have in tree. And having cloud provider and the vSphere CSI plugin will make basically the same experience that everybody has today with Kubernetes on vSphere, also with the auto tree provider, which, by the way, are the way to go and will become stable. The CSI will become stable by end of year, and possibly cloud provider will become stable by 1.14, which is slated for early 2019. Sorry. So we want to have that. We thought that the people that were actually taking care of writing that code will bring it forward, but there was some miscommunication there and some resource constraint problems. So we wanted to start creating this project. So we weren't sure if this would have been something like a different sub project or something that we want to tie into the cloud provider work, given that this is specific for storage. This has nothing to do with what the cloud provider does regularly. This is really just about attaching, detaching volumes, and so on. So this is something that is very storage specific. We weren't sure if there was anything that we could do, like creating a different sub-project under the storage SIG, or creating something under SIG VMware. So I wanted to see if there were any ideas here of how should we be treating this project, if you think this would be something that could fit under the cloud provider work or not. We've seen people from other cloud providers or other SIGs and other cloud providers doing different things. I've seen OpenStack doing this work as part of cloud provider. I've seen AWS is working on this in a total private fashion. They haven't shared anything about their EBS CSI plugin so far as I can tell.
So Fabio, working groups can't own code, but sub-projects do. Can sub-projects own what would affect it? I'm going to be technical, but it's more of a political thing. What would effectively be like a Git sub-module? And what I mean is can there be a sub-project to focus the work related to something that may be eventually non-specific to K8? So if there was a sub-project for the CSI storage driver, even though it would be non-specific to Kubernetes, by its design, but the sub-project would still be where people would go in order to focus on it for Kubernetes-related work. Or just put it under the cloud provider, I mean.
Yeah, you're making a good point, because I'm not sure if everybody is aware that CSI is not something that is specific to Kubernetes. It's actually, a standard that is supposed to be working with different container orchestrators, including.
And I believe the storage SIG already has such a thing going on there, Andrew.
Okay, real quick, Clint may know this. I wasn't sure when we left Dell, but did CSI ever get adopted by the CNCF as the official storage for API for containers, or is that still in the air? I don't know if Clint's on. Fabio, do you know?
Well, I haven't been to the meeting this week, but last I heard it is not adopted. It's independent.
Okay. Because I know, I don't know if it's relevant, but I know that in the past, when you refer to CSI, with respect to the CNCF, people are like, well, hold on, no one's adopted it or made it official yet. So I don't know how that does or doesn't affect its relationship.
They've declared themselves official. What's your definition of official? If it is by definition,
yeah, sure,
then no, it isn't. But it is a standalone group at this point.
Well, Steve, I was speaking specifically with the relationship to the official governance. I just didn't want to do it the wrong way necessarily. That's all.
Now that I think of it, I actually remember seeing something about CSI being offered or in talks with CNCF to become a project on the CNCF, but
it was, and I don't know that it was ever adopted. It's just being worked on it's got momentum, and it's the container storage API de facto, but it's not been made de jure. So
and I think until they get, I may be wrong on this, but I think they actually have to get users and things so that until they reach some stage of actual usage, I don't think they're eligible to become one of these official projects. So they can't do it immediately at inception.
By the way, from a Kubernetes perspective, there were two competing standards for storage interfaces, and one was called Flex Volumes, I think, and the other one is CSI.
That was never really it.
Yeah, I mean, there's some implementation laying out there, but as far as I understand, the winning standard is CSI when it comes to Kubernetes list. I don't know about other container orchestrator out there, but
Flex Volumes was tantamount to shell exec.
Flex is definitely Kubernetes specific, and technically you can't declare winner because I think Flex is still alive, and because of their deprecation standards, even when CSI goes out the door on Kubernetes, there will be some time period, if not an indefinite one, where they're both supported to some degree. Anyway, we're kind of going off the reservation of this SIG into the storage SIGs territory here.
No, I think this is more like a discussion and trying to understand what will be the best venue to host this CSI effort.
Fabio?
Yep.
So I would agree with what Andrew said, that put it like in the cloud provider or make it a submodule in the cloud provider, just for like ease of use and readability from non-maintainers, but end users like me, or if you have to do troubleshooting. It's as of today, it's like in tree, you just go in, you check the code, everything is in one place, and it's just gathering it around is a little bit difficult from a troubleshooting perspective. Just from that side.
At the same time, I would strongly caution against coupling CSI with something else, because it definitely is something that evolves by itself, and coupling it or make it a submodule could introduce some.
Well, I didn't mean that technically, Vlad. I meant that.
No, and I'm not saying technically either. I'm just talking about just location. Just. If you.
I didn't mean literally a submodule, but.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I just meant as a way to describe the work, sort of like a viewport. Because I mean, we can all be honest, right? If we weren't working on it for Kubernetes, it wouldn't probably have as much momentum. So, to be able to organize resources around it, I think it helps to discuss it in terms of Kubernetes.
Oh, absolutely, and
I think at most this is just a convenience packaging thing, and the discussion, planning, dev work belongs under the storage SIG, not here.
Yeah, I'll. You know what?
Yes.
I think it will be best if we, given that the need is coming from us, and there's no clear understanding of where this thing should be located. I mean, for cloud provider, we have an existing standard, which is we have a repo under Kubernetes. Kubernetes org has standard for cloud provider, vSphere, cloud provider, OpenStack, and so on. Cluster API, same thing, but there's no such standards for CSI, or at least
Would there
nothing
be a
that
sub project under SIG storage? Maybe could we recommend that?
exactly. So I
CSI?
think the action item
Vlad knows better than me.
for this
Yeah,
one
so what I
would
was going to add is right now, the understanding is that vendors can host their wherever, as long as it's documented in a central location, which is what it's kind of is right now. We have different CSI vendors with implementations out there, and it's basically if you go to the CSI documentation, the Kubernetes CSI documentation, there's a list of available implementations with the link to where they're located. That's what it is today.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, it might be something that. So my idea was to just attend SIG storage, maybe try to put this up for discussion on list to have some perspective from them. And I think this is maybe, and I'm just guessing again, this would be something worth a discussion with SIG storage.
Yeah, I just posted it in the chat, but SIG Storage already has created a CSI working group. The link is there.
No, what I was more thinking is that maybe CSI working group and maybe SIG storage, they don't have context when it comes to what it takes to have a cloud provider go out of tree with a current code that's an in tree. It will entail having basically to split up the node controller stuff into its own provider, which is the cloud provider out of tree, and then the storage piece to become its own CSI plugin, and have them without having both, especially for on-prem, but also for cloud providers.
Well, I think the attitude, I mean, I do go and attend some of those meetings. The attitude for why they wouldn't go with it being attached to a Kubernetes cloud provider, the key there is the word Kubernetes, where they envision that these CSI plugins are not just out of tree from Kubernetes, but out of tree for Apache Mesos, for example.
Right.
So that you would need to package them independently of the cloud provider just so that other orchestrators could use them.
Gotcha. Okay.
So Fabio, does this really become just a discussion we need to have with the SIG cloud provider first, since they're the ones that put down the edict that this should live with that? I mean, you could say like, look, that's actually antithetical to the purpose of CSI.
I think this is definitely worth of a follow-up with SIG cloud provider and maybe SIG storage as well, and see what the general consensus of CSI and cloud provider to cooperate in the future. I think that the problem here really is the user, right? The user has to, in order to have the same user experience that they have today when they download and use the in-tree providers, being their storage or cloud providers, in-tree, is that they just put, a flag, they put a feature flag that say, okay, -- provider vSphere, and they have everything that comes with that automatically configured or working, right, or deployed, because the code is already part of Kubernetes. And when you have to deploy a cluster that will have no, vendor-dependent code in it, so let's say Kubernetes 120, all right, you will have to have, apply a YAML for the cloud provider and apply a YAML for the CSI plugin, right? So what will this user experience look like if you have people that have experience using Kubernetes with in-tree cloud provider and in-tree storage providers to experiencing a Kubernetes with out-of-tree cloud and storage providers? I think this is where the real problem is. But yeah, I don't want to derail this conversation and keep it longer than it's needed. I just make sure that we have a follow-up with SIG cloud provider and SIG storage on this. All right. And thanks for the helpful links in the chat. I'll definitely check them out later.
Make sure we add those to the docs though, because remember that the chat disappears after the meeting, and people that join later don't show up.
Yeah, I'm just gonna copy paste them. In the meantime, there's so Doug McEachran has volunteered to help us better understanding the VC simulator. So VC Sim, for those who do not know what the tool is for, it's basically a simulator for vSphere. It will simulate a vCenter endpoint, and it will, help you build your test case and potentially even running end-to-end test against a simulated environment instead of a real live one. Especially useful given that, Andrew, you mentioned this, I think, in the last call, that the SIG testing really wants to have portable testing as much as possible, and there's really little portable in having a vSphere environment, a live vSphere environment with everything set up. So VCSIM definitely up here.
Not to be pedantic, but they would. Whenever I say portable, Tim St. Clair always will correct and say portable shouldn't, like, you shouldn't design things to be portable. Just the tests themselves shouldn't require external dependencies. Now I call that portable, but I guess there's a slight difference, specifically to the conformance tests and then the release signal tests.
So no external dependencies. In this case, having a simulator will be
including secrets, by the way, which is a nice thing about the simulator. We don't need them.
Yeah, exactly. So Doug has agreed in having like a, I think we're scheduled for 1 hour next week. Same time slot as this call, but next week, so the week that we usually off with the SIG VMware call. So I'll send out an invitation on the SIG VMware mailing list for this slot with the Zoom link and everything. So next week, Thursday the 23rd of August, 11 a.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. for those in Europe. We're going to have Doug go over VCSIM, how to use it. It is extremely useful, even if you're not interested in anything Kubernetes related, because it's just like a nice tool to have, like, basically a simulated vSphere environment to run things against. So if you're interested, please make sure to join. It's going to be very helpful, especially if you want to write test against vSphere, or if you want to automate something around that. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the active projects update. We have a few things up here for discussion. Something we mentioned a few meetings back, I think. There was a VM UID fix in the in-tree cloud provider, so we're still tracking some of the issues we have there. I think I wasn't sure if this, so this problem has been there for some time. Apparently, because of something that happened in 1.11, problems popped up more frequently for customers and for people that were using the in-tree vSphere cloud provider. The fix was put out almost immediately. I think this was Doug. Thank you, Doug. But it didn't make the cut for 1.11.1. So it got cherry-picked for 1.11.2, which shipped, I think, August the 7th, so last week. So good job on that, everybody. We also have a big one, which is we have zone support, again, in the in-tree cloud provider. This is work that was done by Jaitong Wang and Michael Gash. Jaitong was a very good intern we had at VMware for the summer. He did a great job working with Michael and setting up the zone support. We had a demo last week, so if you missed the meeting last week, go check out the recording on YouTube. There's a nice demo about zone support.
Thanks, guys. What happened to Jaitong? Did he go back to school?
I think he went back to school this week. Yeah, I think his last week was last week. So yeah, he's back at school for his last semester, I think. And this is what we call phase one. So the support is there. It's using tags in vSphere. So great stuff. Great, great foundational work on that. We're gonna have phase 2, like supporting drift and other things. I think Michael, you're still on the hook of providing feedback for that. Yeah, in general, good job. The support was merged. I think it was merged last week or the week before, so it's fresh. I don't think it made it in 1.11.12. I don't think so, but it will be there for the next release for sure. And then I see we have something new for you, Michael. Status on VCP UX.
Hey, Fabio, just had a question about the zone support that was added.
Sure.
Who is the maintainer for it now? Is Giatong gonna continue to maintain it, or do we have someone else from SIG VMware raising their hand for it?
We have. I'm not sure if he signed up to do this, but if you have Pranchu from VMware to actually, start working on that. He met with Jiatong. They talked about the current implementation, and I think he's gonna start working on that. But again, the initial support is out there, and there's a very detailed issue that is basically outlining all the work that is still required to do on the functionality and everything. So again, if you're willing to look into the work that still has to be done, feel free. We'll be happy to review PRs.
Thanks.
And Michael is has been on this thing since the very beginning. I think Michael, I think you actually wrote the first issue for this, right?
Yeah, I pushed hard to get that in.
Yeah, I remember you were, I remember you were the first one I talked about on this. So yeah, again, if you're feeling like you want to contribute on this, just reach out to Michael, reach out to me. There's definitely still work to do there.
Thanks, Fab.
And yeah, Michael, you want to give us an update on this VCP UX?
Yeah, and that was just a question going back to one of the last 6 where we talked about documentation issues and documentation updates. Same for the zone support now. What is the who owns documentation for the open source contributions that we do in the cloud provider, especially around the scripts that are in the VMware repo for deploying Kubernetes, VCP, etc.?
That's a very good question. I was actually thinking about that the other day when I stumbled upon the documentation about. I think you're referring to the helper container that we have.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So there's this is actually an outstanding item on my to-do list. So let's see if I can give a recap of all the information I have on this topic specifically. So Intree Cloud Provider. For the Intree Cloud Provider, there's a website that people from VMware have set up. But it's basically the documentation for how to install the cloud provider. Given that the cloud provider has a few steps you have to go through, the same people that are basically maintaining what is called Project Hatchway, they created a helper container that will help you create, the VCP conf configuration. It will go through basically all the tedious process of encoding base64 passwords for you and things like that. That documentation is sitting in a specific repo under VMware, which is a fork of Kubernetes. So we have a github.com/VMware/Kubernetes repo, which again is a fork of Kubernetes. It's actually a very old fork of Kubernetes that is not being used to actually work on the Kubernetes code, but is used to host the scripts and everything, and the documentation that is basically building up this website where the documentation, where actual documentation from Kubernetes.io is linked to. But the major problem with this repo is that we have people filing issues on that repo specifically for anything that is related to the vSphere, the in-tree vSphere cloud provider. So on my agenda, on my to-do list, I wanted to get rid of that repo at some point and have those issues converge into Kubernetes if they're they have merit in being there, meaning that there are outstanding critical issues that have to be fixed in the in-tree cloud provider. But if they're like feature requests or new things they want to support, we want to have them in the current development repo, which is now Kubernetes cloud provider vSphere. So I haven't hacked upon it for one reason, which is I don't know exactly who owns that repo and who's behind triaging the issues that are coming in. Again, I'm not sure who owns that. I'm trying to find out. I have a slightly suspicion of the people that are behind that, but again, I don't have clear understanding of the ownership of that, so I haven't touched it yet. But it's definitely something that has to bubble up and become part of the SIG VMware calls, become part of the cloud provider calls, because all that valuable information that is sitting there is right now not being properly groomed, because again, there's some issues that have been open for some time without anybody looking at them. So it's just have some hygiene in the repo, and then have some hygiene again around the development of the plugins. So I don't have a clear answer for you, Michael, on that, but I know what that is, and it is on my to-do list to fix. If anybody has any idea on actually how to proceed in that, I will very glad to listen to them. Again, it's one of those ownership problems that unfortunately, everything being done by a company, most of the time in private setting and not in a public setting, definitely don't help with clearly stating who's owning that or not. We plan to fix that, but it's going to take some time.
Sure, yes. So I can't offer like finding the people who are behind that. I as you said, this you might already know them, but what I can help with is helping with the documentation, or at least have a look from the end user perspective, because I think it's still based around 1.9, and so there's many features, many changes, also security related stuff, and communities like OpenShift, they depend on what we document, and so it definitely needs update.
It will be so right now, if I'm thinking of specifically the documentation problem, I think it will be great to have a new, I would say, a new section where we can start documenting both the old in-tree cloud provider and the new out-of-tree cloud provider in the same spot. And the fact that right now the only official documentation that we have, and it is for the in-tree cloud provider, it is sitting in this repo that is really no longer properly maintained and so on. I think it would be great if, even if you want to file an issue, not necessarily start working on that, even though you're very welcome to start working on documentation. In the new cloud provider repo, so a Kubernetes cloud provider vSphere, start creating obviously the skeleton for the documentation website. This is actually something that is an ongoing discussion in SIG Cloud Provider as well. So SIG Cloud Provider is trying to create a process around creating standardized documentation for the cloud providers, because everybody's going out of tree, so everybody should have a way to have a standardized way of installing cloud providers and so on. So this is not something that is set in stone yet, but we can potentially lead by example, especially since our current the current situation of our documentation is kind of poor. So if we start by creating a skeleton in the new out-of-tree repo that we have, which is under Kubernetes, and we can start putting down documentation for both the old in-tree cloud provider, which you might have you know, a lot of knowledge about especially running newer versions that are not even listed in the website currently. I think you said there were still at 1.9 or something like that.
Probably 1.10, but not 1.11.
Okay, so we're definitely list one more version behind. So even having something that is, you know, up to date for the in-tree, and maybe start building on the auto tree documentation as well, will be great. So it will be awesome if you could file an issue.
Yeah, we'll do. We'll do.
Will
Okay.
help a lot.
Thanks, Fabio.
Okay, that was great. Anything else people want to talk about? All right. We still have a few minutes left if somebody wants to put something on the table to discuss. Right now will be the right time to do it. If not, I can give you back 13 minutes of your time. All right. Going once. Going once, going twice. All right. I'll see you guys in 2 weeks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.